Yo, what's good, everybody? I am back with another video. It's been a minute, but I've got a banger for you guys today. Temporal Force's latest Pokemon T.C.G set came out, and it looked so fun that I have just been spending the last week, 2 weeks, grinding it on Pokemon T.C.G Live, and I've been having a blast. It doesn't even feel like a grind. I've played over 100 matches since the set's release, and I have to tell you guys, I feel very strongly that this is one of the best times to play Pokemon TCG. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video. It's going to be a bit of a guide, bit of a matchup explanation, bit of a future box tips and tricks. A lot of stuff I've learned from going from the very beginning of my account, Togepi, Pokeball level, all the way to the Masterball rank, maintaining an 80% win rate with future box. Hopefully that can sort of help you guys out. Anyway, this is just the proof, obviously the flex. This is the list I use. Let's get right into it, right? Let's get right into the list. This is not my list. I did not design this list. I've been out of Pokemon competitive for a little while. I used to play a lot more back in the in different eras. I played Gardevoir EX in 2017. I played Black and White stuff in 2012, 2011, that sort of era, and I think that right now is just a great time to get into the game. All the decks look super fun. They're super interesting. They're intricate. They have lots of cool decision trees. The Pokemon design is really sick. The card design is really sick. So yeah, without further ado, this is Henry Brand's future box deck list that I used. Now there are some things that I'm going to change, but for the duration of my extended play on the ladder, I did not change a single thing about this deck list. The way the deck works is you try to get Miraidon active going second. You want to choose to go second every single game. You want to get Miraidon active. You want to attack turn 1 with that peak acceleration. You want to put 2 energy into play, either onto Iron Hands or onto another Miraidon or something of that nature. Usually it's going to be going on to Iron Hands. And then from there, you're looking to amp you very much every single turn for the rest of the game and just take the rest of your prizes, and hopefully your opponent is stumbling because you just have such a fast, powerful start. This deck is really, really consistent at getting that off. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but most of the time you are getting a turn 2 peak acceleration with an Iron Hands in play, thanks to a lot of the powerful consistency cards in this deck. Number 1 being Arven, probably the best supporter in the game right now. I don't think you can play this deck without 4 Arven. I think it is just fantastic. It is very, very strong. It searches you both the Techno Radar, and it also searches you for a tool card, whether that's Future Booster to move an Iron Crown out of your active so you can get Miraidon in the active, or a Heavy Baton so you can suit up your Iron Hands so that when it does inevitably faint, you can move the energy onto another Iron Hands and keep that advantage train rolling. Now, there is a secondary game plan of this deck, which is use the electric generators to just put a bunch of energy onto Iron Hands, but this game plan is very unreliable. You usually only do this in desperation moments. It is, however, necessary. I think that you do need to play the electric generators to set up Iron Hands in some capacity. I think this Pokemon lineup is the bare bones Pokemon lineup, pretty much. I think you could maybe even get away with 2 Iron Hands, although it does come up in some matchups where you need a second pretty early, and prizing one of them could be detrimental. So I think 3 is pretty good. You could also make an argument for a 3rd Miraidon, but it only came up once for me in about 85 games where I prized double Miraidon and I lost because of it. And I think that that's fair. I think if it comes up once in 85 games, like, you know, that's going to happen. You have unlucky prizes. Just go next. It's fine. Some of the cards that I never used in my entirety of playing this deck on the ladder, and whether that's just because I had insane god luck, or because sometimes I was playing an opponent who is incompetent, or because this deck is just super fast. Counter Catcher never got played, not a single time. I don't think that I ever used it, and it just never came up. I don't think I was ever behind really in a meaningful fashion where Counter Catcher was the card I needed. Oftentimes, if I'm behind, I need to be attacking what's in the active that's currently beating me. So Counter Catcher is like not great. And then against a lot of decks that can keep up with you, they have a lot of redundancy. So like Future Box or Ancient Box or that sort of thing, the stuff on their bench is usually identical to the stuff that's in the active. So Counter Catcher is like pretty useless in those scenarios. The only times Counter Catcher ever like had a hypothetical use is when you're up against Future Box and they are just steamrolling you because they got the coin flip right. They chose to go second. and then they set up, right? And then maybe counter catcher, blah, 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 blah. We'll get into this more when I get into things. Basically, I really liked Henry Brand's deck list. I think it's very consistent. All of the cards have application besides counter catcher and like one or two other things like that felt a little bit kind of sus, which we'll get into later. Let's talk a bit about the pros and cons, why I think you guys should try this deck out, why I think you guys should know how this deck works. The pros of this deck are it is insanely fast, free wins versus stumbled openings, and misplays because Iron Hands snowballs. Iron Hands takes extra prizes, so every turn that you get extra to use your Iron Hands is even more advantage that you get. It's even more extra prizes that you take. If you take one extra prize, it's like a significant advantage, don't get me wrong. But if you take two extra prizes, you have infinite time to win the rest of the game. Number 2, Arven is broken. Best supporter in the game right now. It has great comeback potential. Thank you to Iron Hands. That's number 3. You can fall behind in prizes and then come back with a couple of big Iron Hands attacks. Amp you very much, especially. It has at least a 40-60 matchup versus Charizard EX, which is the most popular deck right now. And it has great matchups across the board. I've made a beautiful little matchup chart. We'll get into that in a second. Low resource game plan, so it's very easy to execute exactly what this deck is doing. And this is key, in my opinion, because tournament play in Pokemon is best of 3. So you want something that's going to be low mechanicals. Like, you don't want something that's like shuffling, drawing every single turn, because then you're going into time frequently. And going into time is just, it's kind of a natural part of best of 3 in Pokemon. I think best of 3 in Pokemon is a little bit, they either need longer rounds or they need to figure out some sort of way to speed it up. I'm not really sure exactly how, but I think best of 3 for tournament play, there's some discussion about it. And whether or not the discussion is warranted is up in the air. But I think it's nice that this deck is just easy to execute everything, easy mechanically, so that you're spending less time shuffling and more time actually playing the game, which is super important for tournament play. The cons are going first kind of sucks, and people usually know that in best of 3 play. So like game 2, they'll make you go first. They'll be like, okay, you got to go first. And it does suck, especially in the mirror match. It's pretty bad. Like, I think that's like really where you feel going first the worst. It also feels pretty bad versus like, I don't know, any deck that has really strong supporters like Arven. Like going first against Charizard feels pretty bad. And I know that the new Tord like list with Cleffa is aiming to go second so that they can Arven first, which is you know, it's dangerous. So yeah, cons, going first kind of sucks. It has a pretty inflexible game plan. This specific build that I was using, it does one thing very well, and that is use Ampy very much. That being said, Ampy very much is good against most things, so it's not the end of the world. Like, I think it's still very powerful, but the fact of the matter is it's pretty inflexible. You're going to be doing roughly the same thing every single game. There are some matchups where you do things differently, where you go double Miraidon instead. We'll get into that in a second. And the only way you can really get set up is by using Miraidon or Generator RNG. So this is a little bit awkward because one of your main ways, or the most consistent way you have of getting set up, takes an entire turn. Unlike something like a Gardevoir EX or a Charizard EX that uses the abilities to attach energies, Miraidon uses your attack, which costs you a whole turn. So later in the game, if your setup gets stunted for whatever reason and you need to set up again, it's going to cost you a full turn later in the game. So it's a lot of like really fast aggression up front, and then, you know, if you get stunted later on, you might have to take an extra turn, which sucks, or you might have to get lucky off of some Generator RNG, which never feels like the best thing in the world to be relying on a card that looks at the top however many cards of your deck and has to hit whatever. Anyway, there are some awkward non-synergies. Miraidon isn't electric for Generator. Miraidon takes electric, psychic for the second attack. It's a little bit awkward. It doesn't take a colorless. If it took a colorless, there would be more talk of certain cards that I'm going to mention later. But yeah, there's just some awkward non-synergies in the deck. And then the deck mulligans kind of frequently. It might just be my experience, but I was mulliganing in roughly 60% of my games, which is really high. That seems like a lot. But I guess, you know, it takes the good with the bad. I think that with this specific strategy, though, mulliganing does suck because a lot of this, like I wrote in the pros, is that if your opponent stumbles in the opening, then you can punish it really, really quickly with Miraidon and Ampy very much. And when you mulligan, your opponent gets to draw extra cards, which means they're that much less likely to stumble in their opening, and you are that much less likely to get those free wins that this deck is really, really known for. So definitely something to consider. Possibly might want to add a few extra basics. We'll get into that later. What is this next thing? Oh, these were my wins and losses. So yeah, I had 62 wins and 19 losses from Togepi to Masterball. I don't know if that math adds up or whatever, but I think I played the first 3 games because I needed to unlock something with like Lost Tina. So I had like 3 other games where I played Lost Tina, and then I had like 3 other games where I played another deck. But mostly these are all of the games that I played from Togepi rank to Masterball with just this Iron Hands list. And these were my losses. I lost to 10 Charizard, 2 of which were a disconnect, and 1 of which there was a bug, which didn't allow me to see my opponent's cards. And then I had another bug in another game, which I don't know if I wrote this, but it wouldn't let me take Techno Radar from my deck with Arven for no reason. I mean, PTCGLIVE is, like, I will give it credit where credit is due. It's functionally free to play, which is amazing. I am never really going to complain about anything that's free to play that much, but there are a lot of bugs and there are a lot of connection issues, which definitely don't have to do with my internet. So, yeah, kind of wild. I lost to 4 mirror matches. It's a tough match. If you lose a coin flip, it's just tough. I lost 1 to a Psychic, like a Spatra control. I lost 1 to Long Raikou. I'll talk about Long Raikou a little bit later. I lost 1 to Dialga Metang. He just high rolled me and then had the nuts. I lost 1 to Ancient Box. This one was weird because I didn't really know it was Ancient Box because there was a bug where I couldn't see any of his cards. They were just pink for some reason. It was just a blank pink cardboard. And I just saw my opponent was playing cards, and I just didn't know what he was doing. I could see like one of them at one point that had like back-end text on it, and it said like Ancient something. And I could kind of tell by the damage that was being dealt and like the cards that were being played that he was like using Sadas. But it was just crazy. It was crazy. Insane bug. And then I lost once to Gardevoir because I just opened unplayable, which happens. You know, it's just going to happen in Pokemon. It's a game of variance. But other than that, I was able to win every single one of my matches, and I think the deck is absolutely fantastic. Definitely one of my early picks for a deck that's going to do well at Orlando this weekend, a deck that's going to do well at tournaments moving forward, and a deck that will probably be an omnipresent like meta force moving forward because of just how fast it is and how good it is at like punishing like just stumbling starts. Anyway, let's get in the matchup chart. This is what I think is the matchup chart after about 80 or so matches with the deck. I've played against all of these decks. I think the good and favorable matchups are anything where Miraidon can take an early KO while setting you up, and anything where Iron Hands is hitting for weakness, or you're getting easy amp you very much turns over and over and over again. So Comfy, the Lost Origin, Lost Zone decks are pretty free. Miraidon just eats those for breakfast. You can just go Miraidon, set up double hands, and it's just like very difficult for them to ever win. Lugia V-Star, amp you very much knocks it out for 3 prizes, so it's pretty free win. Pidgeot EX Control, this deck is just too slow. They can't really interact with you in any meaningful metric. You play a lot of energies, so it's very difficult for them to like crushing hammer you out of the game. So it's just a really easy matchup. Ampy very much goes crazy there as well. You do kind of have to play conservatively with your Iron Crowns. You don't want to bench too many of those. We'll get into a couple of those play things a little bit later. Roaring Moon EX. So this one is actually favorable, but it isn't favorable if you don't know how to play it. So there's something I do want to mention here. This is kind of like a little tip and trick. Not this guy. That's a different thing. I think this card. There we go. I've got my tabs open like crazy. So Heavy Baton. This is a pretty crucial card, right? You place it on your Iron Hands, and once you've loaded up your Iron Hands, if your Iron Hands gets knocked out, you get to move energies from that Iron Hands to a benched one. Now in the Roaring Moon matchup, there's an interesting sort of thing that comes up, which is Frenzied Gouging, which knocks out your Iron Hands without technically dealing damage to it. And this also can come up in Lost Tina matchup, but it comes up a lot less because by the time they're using Lost and whatever V-Star attack, you've already gotten all the value out of the Iron Hands, usually speaking. But definitely comes up in the Roaring Moon EX. The way Heavy Baton is worded is it says, if it's knocked out by damage from an attack, technically Roaring Moon doesn't deal damage. So when it uses Frenzy Gouging. If it uses Calamity Storm, it does. But if it uses Frenzy Gouging, or specifically, it knocks out the Iron Hands, and then you don't get to move the energy to the next Iron Hands. So it's very, very crucial in this matchup that you set up double Miraidon. So you want to have 2 Miraidon set up in this matchup, because when the Roaring Moon EX inevitably uses Frenzy Gouging on your Iron Hands, you want to have the second Miraidon, or at least a first Miraidon, ready to go to attack for that 1 energy, knock out the weakened Roaring Moon EX, trade 2 for 2, and then set up another 2 energy with the peak acceleration. So you definitely want to prioritize having multiple Miraidon, especially if one goes down. You always want to have one like just lingering, because you need to be ready to knock out that Roaring Moon EX before it gets a chance to attack again. And you also need to get those energy. And then it's also pretty high priority to make sure you have the Lost Vacuum as well, or enough Iron Crowns so that your Miraidon can knock out Roaring Moon EX from 90 remaining hit points in case they have the Ancient Tool attached, basically. I don't think a lot of the Roaring Moon to Dunsparce decks, I don't know how much of the Ancient Tool they play. I think they play 4. I'm not really sure. Anyway, that's just like a little addendum. The matchup is good, but you kind of got to play around that interaction with Heavy Baton and Frenzy Gouging a little bit differently. Gardevoir EX, this matchup I think is very favorable. Gardevoir EX got nerfed like crazy after the rotation. They lost the Shining Arcana. They lost a lot of their powerful tools. You do have to be careful of Iono. Just make sure you have the Mew EX in play. Mew EX will help you a lot, but fast Miraidon KOs, fast amp you very much, will be very difficult for this deck to keep up with. Usually they can get set up, and if you have a slow start and you miss that turn 1 Miraidon attack, then it can be a little bit dicey, but it's overall a good matchup. And then Miraidon EX, the electric Miraidon EX decks, I don't know if people still play these. I actually have, I have a recorded match of it somewhere, but I didn't pull it up for this video because this video is going to be 8 million years, because I'm explaining a lot. I do have some videos pulled up, some gameplay, which we'll get into here in a second. But yes, I think this matchup is very good for the future decks, because they are basically doing what your deck does, but worse and slower and less consistent. So yeah, definitely like the like that matchup. If I could pick a matchup, I think that'd be one of the ones I would pick. The roughly even matchups, I think, are these 4. Chien-Pao is roughly even. If they ever get set up, it's annoying, but their deck usually loses to itself, and you can also just donk them. So yeah, pretty much just hope they don't get too crazy set up, and hope that they like maybe miss a turn or something like that. It is a high resource deck, Chien-Pao, and you're not playing a high resource deck, so your Ionos are really good against them. And this is a matchup where, in theory, Countercatcher could be really good, but it just never came up for me because you always take the lead in the matchup. So yeah, I think it's pretty free. Chien-Pao being 220 is like kind of a weak number. You can actually pump up Iron Hands enough times to kill it pretty easily. You just need 3 crowns to kill Chien-Pao with Iron Hands. Or you need 3 crowns to kill Chien-Pao with Miraidon, which is even lower resource. You're trading a 1 prizer for a 2 prizer. Arceus V-Star, I haven't played against it a ton. It's pretty even. It's a tough one, though. I think Arctina is probably one of the harder ones. And then the Arceus Noivern, you just basically always got to be ready. Or Arceus Noivern and Alolan Vulpix, whatever. You just always got to be ready to snipe the Noibat. The second they play the Noibat, you got to have bosses ready, or you got to have the custom catcher, or what is not custom catcher, prime catcher. And then you got to have Arven for the prime catcher ready to snipe that Noibat. And then the rest is like pretty straightforward, just like, attack the Arceus with the Miraidon, get the damage on it, and then follow up KO with Ampy very much, take 3 prizes, and just win a prize race. Gouging Fire EX, this is an interesting one. I only played against it once. I feel like it could be bad if my opponent was playing well. They were not playing well, so it was pretty easy. but I think that that's a scary matchup. That's actually a scary deck. I think that that deck is definitely underexplored and has a lot of potential. The fact that it gets Magma Basin and Sada's Vitality all in the same deck, that's a lot of really powerful energy acceleration. It also gets access to a lot of the, strong ancient synergy cards. So that's pretty much that. The Miraidon Ancient Box decks, now this is where that Slitherwing, where the heck is that guy? This comes up. So if they're able to set up Slitherwing to one-shot your Iron Hands, the matchup becomes even. But if they're not able to set up Slitherwing, or they don't play Slitherwing, or they prize their Slitherwing, it is an insanely favorable matchup. It is probably one of the best matchups if they, don't have this guy. But if they do have this guy, then it can get complicated. And then the late game, their Roaring Moons are pretty strong, but usually doesn't get too far into the late game. It's important to try to get KOs with Lost Vacuum. So maybe Miraidon punch something and then punch it again. Maybe go for a double Miraidon punch, even if you're ready to attack with Iron Hands. Get a bunch of energy on both your Iron Hands, and then from there, you can just take 6 prizes pretty much unanswered, since the less ancient stuff you put in the discard pile, the better, basically. So, if you just hit twice with Miraidon, I think that's usually the game plan, or that's usually what I was aiming to do in that matchup specifically. But it changes game to game, obviously, based off of what's happening. Charizard EX is a little bit in between roughly even and clearly unfavorable. I think it is unfavorable, but only slightly. And the statistics from EUIC would also back that up. I think Charizard versus Future was 42% in favor of the Future decks at the EUIC. And that's just one tournament. It's, small sample size, but I think that that's pretty good data. That combined with my general experience with the deck, it contributed to most of my losses, as you guys can see. Most of my losses were to Charizard. 7 were real, but yeah, those 7, they definitely felt real. The deck does need a lot of moving parts to go right, and it does have that Pidgeot EX, which is a 3-prize bench sitter. But I know there is a list that I think Tord used to win the EUIC that has Bibarel, and they can choose not to set up Pidgeot, which can complicate the matchup quite a bit, and it chooses to go second, which complicates things for you as well. And then on top of that, I don't know. It's just a tough matchup. You can really punish them if they stumble, because their deck is pretty clunky and they need a lot of moving parts. They usually need Lost Vacuum plus the Belt plus the Candy Zard plus the Counter Catcher. They need a lot of stuff just to kill your Iron Hands on turn 2. But if they do piece together those 7 cards or whatever it is, then they absolutely can make it impossible for you to win. So yeah, definitely a scary matchup. I would never want to choose to play against this matchup. The matchups that I think are clearly unfavorable are Espatra and Snorlax. Thankfully, these are both pretty uncommon, and Snorlax you can mitigate by just playing more switches, which we'll get into when I talk about the changes I want to make moving forward. Espatra is just a weird matchup. Maybe I'm just not used to playing against it. I don't have enough practice against it, but it felt really tough. The few times I played against it, I got lucky one of the times I played against it, and another time it beat me. So, yeah, I don't know. That's just a tough deck. And then the Long Raikou, the elephant in the room. Shout out the channel, of course. Smash like, smash subscribe. You know the vibes. Anyway, the Long Raikou. This matchup is unwinnable. I don't see how Future can ever beat Long Raikou. I think if Future ever becomes super, super popular, make sure you have your Sandy Shocks and your Long Raikous on deck, because, oh my gosh, every part of this deck feels like it was designed to beat the Future deck. Long Raikou plus the Ancient Tool has 1 billion hit points. It's very difficult to knock it out with any of your casts, because there's a little bit of a low damage cap with the Future Box deck list. The Sandy Shocks hits you for weakness. The Lucario hits you for weakness. It's just such a tough deck. They are resilient to Iono because of Pokestop. You don't play stadiums to bump the Pokestop, so they just have it for the whole game. They get set up very easily. They have huge damage output, so they can just one-shot everything in your deck. They do not care. Definitely an unwinnable matchup. I would say unwinnable, because even if they have a slow start, you're not donking a Long Raikou with the tool attached. It's 3,000 HP. It's just so difficult to actually pressure that card. So definitely the worst matchup by far. I think, once again, if Future Box ever gets too popular or you're struggling with it, consider building the Sandy Shocks Long Raikou deck. It's a deck that I'm looking forward to actually trying now that I've finished this grind from Pokeball to Master Rank. Okay, moving on. Oh, cards I want to try. So these are some cards I want to try. We'll talk about these in a second. But first, let's look at the lists that did well at the EUIC. There's this one, and what is this one? This is 5th place by Ufe. This is 6th place by Yuho. I don't know how to pronounce your names. I'm sorry, Europeans. Get owned. And then there's the 10th place by Simone. I know Simone, all right? I know how to say that, all right? And if you look at these, very powerful list, pretty similar. There's some key changes. So the first one we'll look at here only had 1 Nest Ball. I think this is a mistake. I think you need 2 Nest Ball. You need to hit Miraidon. If you don't hit Miraidon, like, your deck just does nothing. So definitely want the second Nest Ball. I do like 2 Pokegear. I think that's pretty hot. It gets you access to that Arven more consistently. I think 2 Boss's Orders is probably fine. But I definitely liked just having the third because you see it often. And you see it when you need to see it. 2 Iono, I don't remember if I was even playing 3 or whatever the deal was. Is this it? Is this the deck list here? Yeah. Was I playing 3 Iono? I was. I liked 3 Iono. I just liked having that, like, little bit of disruption. But I could totally see 2, especially because he's got that Pokegear to try and find it. Erica's Invitation is a card that's on my to try list. The way this card works is you look at your opponent's hand, you get to put a basic there, and then switch it into their active. It's just another way to get like a cheeky Miraidon KO for game or a cheeky MP Very Much KO for game if they want to play conservatively and not bench their Pokemon. Or if you're playing against some bullshit like Noivern, it helps there as well. I don't really think this card is anything special. I'm not even sure it's better than the third Boss's Orders, but it's interesting to say the least, and it did very well for Ufe. He also has 1 Counter Catcher, which I could totally see going down to 1 or even 0 of this card. It is nice to have the 1 to find off of Arven in case you do need it, but I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to need it. In any given tournament, I may need it once. Like, who cares? Like, that, I'll take that L to have a more consistent slot used. I brick on Counter Catcher a ton, so I'm like super over this card. It contributed to a lot of my dead hands in this grind. The rest of it looks almost identical to the deck that I played. Moving on to the next one, we've got Juho? I don't know. 15 energy, so slightly less energy. He's only got 1 psychic energy. So he decided to give up that percentage. I think this is incorrect. I think 2 psychic energy is pretty important unless you're on gift energy. But I do think 2 psychic energy is pretty important because attacking with Miraidon comes up a lot. Like, it's not just once or twice or whatever. And if you prize that psychic energy and you need to attack with Miraidon, no, you're lost. You're just dead lost. I can't accept this. I can't accept this decision to go down to 1 psychic energy. I think you absolutely need the second one. Now, there are some cool cards in here. There's the Town Store Crisis Punch combo. Town Store can also help him find the Future Booster to get him a more consistent Turn 1 Miraidon. He does have the double Nest Ball. He's got 3 Counter Catcher. Bro, what? Are you crazy? Like, this card is terrible. It never did anything for me. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I was just getting lucky. I don't really understand, but yeah, it just never came up for me in like 85 games. So I can't imagine playing 3 of this card. I definitely think that 1 or 0 is the correct number. He's got 4 Research, 4 Arven, 3 Iono, only 1 Boss's Orders, which is also wild. I actually think you need more than 1 Boss's Orders. I think at least 2, if not 3. But yeah, I do see having 4 Research. I think that that's pretty important. I could definitely see going up to 4. There are some games where you're just like, I really need a draw supporter, and just having the extra one will be nice. That being said, he cut, Pokegear for it, and I'm not necessarily sure that Pokegear is worse than the 4th Research. So, food for thought. Pokegear is kind of like a potential Arven, and Arven's just the best one. So, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sold on that. But I do like the Town Store Crisis Punch. That's pretty cool. That's a cool combo for sure. I just think it might be a little bit difficult to, like, get 3 energy into play. But this card definitely helps you in some of these roughly even matchups. Like against Arceus V-Star, it's very useful. Against the Gouging Fire, it's very useful. And it can be okay versus Charizard, but usually versus Charizard, your Miraidon hits it for like 80, and then you can just KO it with the Iron Hands anyway. You don't need a Crisis Punch for it. But maybe it can help versus like a Spatra or something. I'm not really sure exactly where you would totally utilize it. Most of the decks that are like 280, you kind of just beat them anyway. You know what I mean? You kind of just like, you weaken it with Miraidon and then you kill it with hands, and that's kind of how it goes. Or you weaken it with Miraidon, you kill it with Miraidon. But yeah, interesting list. And then this 10th place list, this one is very interesting because it does play that Iron Leaves, which is the tech card that people use to one-shot Charizard EX because it is weak to grass. Now, having this card in your deck does make you better against Charizard, but I will say that it does make you worse against almost everything else. It's a terrible starter. It's a terrible attacker in most matchups that aren't Charizard. It's low HP, low damage output. It makes it so you can't play Psychic Energies. It makes your generators worse by cutting Lightning Energies. It weakens your deck overall by strengthening your matchup into Charizard, and that's totally a metagame thing. It's totally a metagame thing. I don't think Iron Leaves EX is good on any other metric other than against specifically Charizard. It's okay versus Roaring Moon, but usually you can knock out a Roaring Moon, or you can force them to gouging whatever the attack is, that frenzied gouging, so that they put themselves to 30 hit points. So it is interesting that he is playing still the full Pokemon lineup alongside the Iron Leaves. He's had to make space for that somehow. He's also playing an Energy Search. This is something that me and my buddy the Rare Hunter talked about, playing an Energy Search or an Earthen Vessel to turn Arven into an Energy Search, which is kind of nice. There are some times where like you need to Arven for an energy to attach to your Miraidon. It comes up. It's very rare. I don't think it's come up for me yet, but it came up for my buddy, and he was like, yeah, it just needs an energy option, which I could totally see that being the case. Interesting, he also played the Super Rod. This is probably to shuffle back those grass energy or to shuffle back that Iron Leaves in the Charizard matchup to be able to get a second chance at it. And he did play one switch card, which I think is absolutely correct. I definitely want to get a switch card in my list. He's down to that one counter catcher. I completely agree with this. Only one heavy baton is a little bit interesting, but I could see it, I guess. I still think it's a little bit risky because if you do prize it, some matchups become very difficult. So interesting to look at all these, and according to that, like this is my to try list. These are cards that I wanted to try out in the list, cards that I found myself kind of wanting in certain circumstances. Town Store for sure, I'm probably going to try to fit in my deck. The one switch card for sure, I'm going to try to fit in my deck. I was thinking, just cut one of the counter catchers and maybe cut, I'm not really sure. Maybe cut like I don't know, man. I don't know. Find space somewhere. Maybe the Pokegear, maybe a Boss's Orders, maybe both counter catcher. Honestly, I don't know. But yeah, definitely want to try to find room for Town Store and the Switch card because I think those cards are great. I want to try Gift Energy because it's something you can attach to Miraidon, and then when your Miraidon inevitably gets knocked out, you get a drop to 7. So it's like having an extra draw supporter. My kind of hesitation with trying it, and the reason I didn't just throw it in the deck initially, is because in those games where you do want to attack with Miraidon, it's kind of just like non-contributing to that second attack that does 160 base damage. So I think that it has downsides there, but it does have some upsides in being like an extra sort of draw supporter. I talked about the Iron Leaves, but there was another list that was floating around that was like multiple Iron Leaves with EXP shares and 4 Miraidon, which looked kind of interesting, but I feel like just going all in on Ampy very much is better overall. But yeah, having multiple Iron Leaves and having the EXP shares obviously just makes the Charizard matchup feel like a breeze. Erica's Invitation, card I definitely want to try. I'm not sure it's better than Bosses, but definitely want to try it out. Iron Boulder EX, I've seen some decks try this guy. He's pretty good against, I think, the Ancient Box, the One Prizer decks. It's good against Gardevoir because you can like hit for like 100-ish knock out one of their Pokemon, and then if another one of their Pokemon attacks you, they put 8 damage counters on it. So you force him to have like a bosses or a counter catcher to play around the Repulsor Axe. He's really, really useful in those matchups, and I think that that's pretty interesting. I'm definitely interested in trying Iron Boulder, especially if Gardevoir becomes more popular as a response to all the Charizard decks. Reboot Pod, I want to try it. I'm 100% certain it's worse than Prime Catcher, but I just want to try it. It's interesting and kind of cool, I guess. Pokemon Catcher, this came up a ton for me where I was just like, I just need a Pokemon Catcher in order to win this game. And so I kind of want to try one, maybe even over the second Counter Catcher. Who knows? And then Iron Valiant EX, I kind of want to try one of him too, but I'm not sure how that's going to work out without a dedicated switching card. So I might try a build that plays like one of him and like a bunch of switch cards, something like that. Who knows? As a way to maybe counter the bad matchup into block lags. But basically, that should just about cover it. This is like kind of my like all-encapsulating guide to this deck. I think it's super fun. I've had a blast. I've ordered most of the cards in paper. I just need to get the Iron Crowns. I'm probably going to take it to a tournament at some point, and maybe I'll do a IRL deck profile once I finish it, and hopefully I'll have some new tech that isn't just a Henry brand stock list. I'll show you guys a few matches because I said I was going to, but this is a match versus Donphan, which I think is another matchup that I'm not really certain on. I only played against it once. It seems like Donphan is not a good deck though. So if you look at my hand here, it's pretty terrible. It's Bosch's Orders, Future Booster, whatever, and then just a bunch of energy. But because he mulliganed, I get Arven. So if your opponent mulligans against you, that's great. And the Donphan deck mulligans a ton. He's going to set up double Donphan. Oh, sorry, it's not Donphan. Great Tusk, my bad. Ancient Donphan, you know what I'm saying? His Trekking Shoes, he just goes crazy, you know? Passes a turn back, we get that Mew. Definitely don't want to bench that Mew in case he has something like a block Snorlax in my future. And we're never going to be using its ability. The idea with this is, I think in this matchup, the way I decided to approach it was just pitch the Mew so it doesn't get like randomly blocked in the active. Grab an Iron Crown and grab an Iron Hands so that I can do 140. I can smack for 140 with Ampy very much and take that extra prize card off of the Donphans and hopefully close the game out like ASAP. Attach the energy to the Miraidon, go for the peak acceleration, and I believe I decide to attach one to the Miraidon and one to the Iron Hands. I am aiming to peak acceleration again on the next turn with the tool attached to deal the extra remaining 80 to knock out this Great Tusk. One thing I would recommend when playing this deck is hold your tools as long as possible because you don't want to expose them to Lost Vacuum and you don't want to need one in case he like catchers up something or like bosses up something. Like you definitely want to have that resource for the moment when they're like, oh, he must not have the tool, they boss you. Anyway, he flips heads on Crushing Hammer, but like who cares? Miraidon just replaces energy like so freely. It's like really not that big of a deal. And this is an instance where like having the second Psychic Energy definitely matters. So something that comes up a lot, especially against these like controlling decks that can like discard your energy, that sort of thing. You're going to be attacking with Miraidon in these matchups in some capacity. So yeah, definitely do want that. Anyway, we get milled for a little bit, but like who cares? We have the generator. We're going to shotgun that boy. We only hit one. If we had hit two there, we could have amped very much this turn and taken 2 prize cards, but I'm not that pressed. We just attached the Future Booster like we had intended on doing. Knock out the Donphan, get 2 more energy in play. We grab the Psychic and the Electric. Psychic on the Miraidon, Electric so we can get that ampy very much going. Once again, keep holding that tool so we don't lose to like a Lost Vacuum plus bosses situation. Pass the turn back. Yeah, so I think this matchup is good. Obviously the opponent's like not doing anything spectacular. I mean, he's doing what the deck does, right? Which is play an ancient card and then mill you for 4. But the thing is that Miraidon, back to kind of the pros and cons, it's a low resource game plan. You don't really need much to do what the deck wants to do. So like against these control decks, against these like strategy decks that are like kind of hoping for you to thin your deck a ton, you don't have to do that. Like I never have to play a Professor's Research, or I never have to play like whatever. And here you can see we attack with the Sparkling Strike or whatever the heck it is to get that 200 hit point knockout on that Ancient Booster Great Tusk. So yeah, from this point, it's just going to be too difficult for the opponent to like kind of chain together those Sadas, those whatever. He doesn't even have basic energy in his discard pile. And that's pretty much how a lot of these games go. You start off with a really fast Miraidon. Your opponent's under a lot of pressure. They have to get going immediately turn 1. And most of the time, decks just don't get going as fast as you do. And you give them basically a turn or two to get something going. Otherwise, they fall behind. And thanks to Amp You Very Much, they can really never come back. Like, I just have to hit twice with Amp You Very Much here, and the game is over. That's just how it's going to go. But yeah, so that's pretty much the end of that one. And then I guess I'll show you the winning in versus, well, this was the first winning in. This was my first match versus the Mirror, which was the last match I was going to play to get into Masters. But you'll notice in the title there that it's pretty sad. Anyway, yeah, so opponent goes for the Radar. We have our own setup as well. We actually have a really nice hand here because you'll see there's a bug. We're not able to see their cards. That comes up a lot. It's super annoying. You kind of have to just like guess what your opponent's playing. But hey, we make do with what we can. We draw for turn. We rip Arven, which is the nuts. This is why Arven is the nuts. With this hand, we can go Arven. Arven grabbed Techno Radar and the, I believe, I can't remember what the other card was. I think it was like Techno Radar plus Future Booster Capsule. And then we go Radar. No. Actually, it's we don't grab Techno Radar. We grab Prime Catcher. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we have a KO here. I can't remember the exact sequencing. I think it's like Prime Catcher. I don't know, but we go for the Arven and then we DC. I need to figure it out in my head. I forget exactly how it works. So if we Prime Catcher and get Future Booster, it's not enough. That's only 100 damage because it's 1 for 40 and then plus 20, 40, 60 on the Miraidon. But then we disconnected on a winning in. But we would have had the advantage here. I mean, we would have been attacking with the Miraidon. We would have been getting the energy in play first. And that's just very frustrating. You'll notice a few bugs, a few disconnects when playing on PTCG Live. And this is the actual winning in versus Lugia, which came a few games later because I had to grind my way back up. But here we are. So you'll see how good of a matchup Lugia is in this quick little replay before we wrap up the video. Thank you guys for tuning in, by the way. This is a game that I love. I love playing Pokemon. It's a blast. It's a great card game, really well designed, super fun, super skill testing. It's very consistent too, which I like. I don't like card games where I feel like I'm gambling. Sometimes Pokemon can feel like I'm gambling, especially with this deck. But you know, hey, it is what it is. Anyway, you grab the Miraidon, pretty simple. You never really want to attach the Future Booster onto Iron Hands if you can avoid it. You definitely want to get the Baton onto Iron Hands. But yeah, we discard the Iono. Low-key get a little punished for that. You'll see here in a second. But we got to grab the second hands, I believe. I forget what I grab. Yeah, I grabbed the second hands because I'm going to possibly need to put a Future Booster onto this hands. He benches the Noibat, which is perfect for us because that's just food for the Prime Catcher and the Miraidon that we have set up. And he uses this card that ends his turn, and I'm like, say less, King. Say less. We top deck another Iono, which is insane versus this order box card. Move the Miraidon to the active. Go for the Iono. Shuffle. Draw 6. Grab ourselves a nice little energy for the Iron Hands. We've got another Techno Radar if we want to play it. There's no reason to bench the other Iron Crown quite yet. We might need to put down a Mew or some shit if we get Iono'd. But the game is not looking like it's going to be going on much longer. We just got rid of both of his Ball Search, and he doesn't have any energy attached. He doesn't have anything too crazy happening. Grabs another Noibat, places that guy down. Arven's, but I mean, that's going to be all she wrote. We're going to be able to just Iron Hands, knock that boy out, provided we hit a boss off this Pokegear. And if we don't hit a boss off the Pokegear, You already know what's coming. It's that Iron Bunda. That Bunda. You know what I'm saying? That boy right there. You see him, you know he's coming for that jank escape rope. That's going to get us this W versus this Noibat bullshit. That's definitely why Iron Bunda's in the deck, by the way. To get around this, or like the Snorlax doll, or like other annoying stuff that people are trying to do. A Spatra is really annoying. The Bunda is very useful. He's like a second bad, very, very bad prime catcher. But he does the job. All right, he gets the job done, and he's going to get the job done for us here as well. We're going to retreat. Opponent's going to concede. They see the writing on the wall. We're going to take 2 prize cards off of the boy, and then we're going to take 3 prize cards off of the Lugia. And you can watch our little points go up. Oh, boom, we hit Master League. So, yeah, one last quick look at the deck list. Boom, take a screenshot, try it out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.